for all those aspiring podcasters listening, I wanted to make sure I ask you, how did you go from freelance writing to having a podcast? I think over 500,000 listeners tuning in.
Yeah, so that was an interesting story. So that's my day job. That's my faith-based podcast, and that podcast came out of a place of frustration, to be honest, seeing Christians not act like Jesus, who we base our religion off of. And so I wanted to make a podcast for women who are truly interested in living like Jesus does. And so that's when I started that, and that was truly meant to be a creative project. Like, I remember using the words art project when I talked about it to people like my husband. He was like, what if no one listens to this? I was like, well, then I don't know, it'll be like an art project I did, like a fun painting, who cares? But it did take off really quickly, I think, because there weren't a lot of people having those kind of conversations in podcast form in the Christian space in 2017. Christians are always like a good couple of years behind everyone else in terms of like artistic technology, things like that. So there were not a lot when I started it, and I think that's why it took off really quickly. And so that's why when I was thinking about ways to promote what happens next, I was like, what is my skill set? What do I love to do? I love podcasting. I love one-on-one conversations like this. This is my jam, way more than like speaking to a huge group. So I wanted to create something that really chronicles the process. And so that's kind of how those two got started. And it's really, I mean, I just don't think it's that hard to start a podcast. It sounds really intimidating with the tech, but there's websites that will break down for you the mic to buy, the recording software to buy. It's not that hard to get up and get going. Although I will say it requires like a little bit of a financial investment, more so than like a blog. So that's probably the number one downside. But I love podcasts, and I love podcasting.
Are you a verbose conversationalist just in life?
Oh gosh, you'd have to ask my husband. Probably. Yeah, I'm kind of a chatterbox. In one-on-one situations, for sure. Those are my favorites. I think in parties, I'm more of like a wallflower. But if I'm like with a good friend over some margaritas or some coffee, I can get to chatting. Yeah.
Now you've given me a wonderful idea for something I'll have to do in a future episode when I get real ambitious, is I'll have to do an interview with an author and then do an interview with an author's spouse. And then we can cut them back and forth and juxtapose what one thinks versus what the other says.
Yeah, you can just input Chris here being like, yes, she's verbose.
I might wreck a marriage, but by God, we'll have a heck of a podcast to listen to.
If COVID didn't wreck a marriage, you can't wreck a marriage.
That's true. So you get the equipment, you get started, and then how long does it take you? What's your routine of posting before you take? I'm assuming it's not just like day 2. Oh my God, 500,000 views.
Yeah, no. We're at over 1 million now. We're at almost 2 million for my main day job
working on really out of date information.
Yeah, you know what? You probably got that from somewhere I had it, because I'm not great at updating my information. But how did we get there? I think that at the beginning I had some kind of big name people on, and so that was pretty helpful. They were willing to share it. And, it took some time. It's kind of like a snowball effect. Word of mouth is really helpful, people telling their friends. I focused really early on having an email list for my podcast, and now I have an email list as an author. And I think email lists are one of those things that sound really cheesy, but if you're providing great emails and great content, people want to sign up for it, and people enjoy getting it. Like, I enjoy getting a few different newsletters from people. And so I focused on that, and that was great because it was a way of reminding people that new content was out. So I put a lot of emphasis on that, like more of that than like Facebook. But I also think knowing where your audience is. And so for my day job Christian podcast, it's called The Catholic Feminist. We focus a ton on Instagram because my ideal audience is like women in their 20s. So that is where they are hanging out. Making a middle grade, I focus a lot more on Twitter. And I'm over talking about there because that's where the publishing people hang out. And so I think knowing where your people are is really important too.
Gotcha. And so how does that inform how you edit your podcast, how you create content specific for them then?
I think that for making a middle grade in particular, I was just thinking, like, what are the questions that I had when I was starting out? Like, what didn't I know? So, for instance, that sensitivity reader thing, like, I was really nervous about having one. And then after the experience, I was like, this was amazing. And ditto copy editors. I was worried about copy editing. My copy editors were the bomb. They made the book so much better, and it was actually kind of a fun process for me. And so I thought, what were the stumbling blocks on my journey from writing this book to seeing it in a bookstore, which, I mean, God only knows when I'm going to see it in a bookstore because we're on quarantine. But that was kind of how I thought about creating that content. And then for making a middle grade, I wanted to make it shorter because I just felt like there is a lot of knowledge and information about the publishing industry already out there. And it's important to me for my content to always be delivering value and not just be like more noise, something that someone's already said, just kind of adding to like a pile of people's opinions. I want it to really stand out and be meaningful. And so sometimes that means just getting to the point. And so that's why it's a little shorter too.
Well, the nice thing about that is once it's all released, a person can sit down and just shotgun the whole thing.
Yeah,
you can wrap it up in an evening.
Totally. There's another podcast about a book deal called The Cookbook Deal by a woman named Jessica Renan, and it's really similar to my podcast, but about making a cookbook. And her episodes are really short, and I think I did that on one long drive. I was driving from Missouri to Wisconsin, so it was like 8 hours, and I listened to her entire podcast, and it was really cool. It was like an audiobook about the making of a cookbook, which I had no idea what that was like. And so, yeah, you could totally do that for making a middle grade.
And do you foresee yourself branching out and doing additional podcasts forever? Or are you pretty happy with what you've got going at the moment?
I think I'm pretty happy with what I've got going at the moment. Again, never say never. I'd really like to pour most of my attention into writing books because that's really where my heart is, and that's what fires me up. And I could probably spit out like 15 new book ideas right now, and I just don't have any new podcast ideas at the moment. So I can't really imagine what other podcast I would do, but that definitely doesn't mean I would never do one because, I mean, you never know when an idea is going to strike.
Well, I've just given you one for free. I'm probably never going to do the author and their spouse podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
You do it.
Clear talks to writing spouses.